During my True Zenoiran run, I wondered how possible it would be to make a unit centered solely on a singular character, one that would actually work if you focused everything on it. Sure, there were tools for it, but I wondered how good you could actually make it. And one of my favorite units actually happens to be Virginia, and I thought she would be a good character to test this on. So this is the unit that I came up with that solely focuses on powering up Virginia. Let's get started. So to start, we can go ahead and just take a look at the team composition I have here. We've got Virginia in the front, supported by a Sergeant, Were-Owl, and then Scarlet. The only character that doesn't directly support Virginia is the Great Knight. He's mainly just there for his utility in terms of movement, as well as just a very solid frontline character that can also bring some much needed crowd control while we wait for Virginia to really kick into gear. So we'll go ahead and start with Chloe the Sergeant. Her primary goal is to provide Virginia with extra action points with active gift, as well as buff her attack with King Call to make sure that we're guaranteed critting as we start to ramp her up later on. I'll get to her kit last, but it will make sense as to why King Call is really good early, and then we can switch to active gift later. The only thing that you really need to make sure that she has is max passive points to make sure that we're giving Virginia active gifts as well as guaranteeing her crits. Beyond that, I think her equipment is pretty flexible. I would recommend maybe giving her some defensive items as she will be taking row hits, so her tactics are pretty straightforward. We just want her to long thrust any full columns that she sees, and then use javelins on flying units or to pick off lower health units that might be sitting in the back line if there are no columns for her to hit. We'll go ahead and move on to Scarlet next, because Scarlet and the Sergeant plus Virginia were kind of the original 3-person / 4-person composition that this was mainly developed around, and that's mainly because of the lyrical wand. This is kind of what started everything. It's what made the early game possible, is the active heal. If you don't know what active heal does, it is a 2 AP cost, and it restores 1 action point to whoever you end up healing. So if we take a look at the tactics, you will see that active heal is just for the front row and just for the infantry. Again, only Virginia will be getting that active point, as that's kind of the purpose of this unit composition, is again to make sure that Virginia is the main person doing the attacks and kind of wrapping everything up, as again, the whole idea of this was to make a gladiator champion or some sort of juggernaut that maybe isn't, your level 40 Amalia, but one that actually scales with the rest of the game. The rest of her tactics are pretty straightforward. If we get any debuffs, I do have her prioritize that instead, as a debuff frontline is not going to do you any good, and I would rather sacrifice 1 action point to make sure that the frontline doesn't die. If she has no one else to heal and everyone's at full health, she will just go ahead and Holy Light at the very end. And I have her on quick heal with Scarlet's Ribbon to make sure that in between attacks, the frontline is still getting those heals to make sure that they survive. Moving on to the next key component is the Were-Owl. Again, Were-Owls are very good at restoring passive points, so the Were-Owl was pretty much a given as soon as I got access to her. With this team composition, I might show some footage of it. I was actually able to take them as like a level 21, level 22 group and do that first mission in Bastorius to unlock the Were-Owl a little bit earlier than expected, so I could use them in Elheim and fully test out this team composition even before we get to the later levels. Her equipment, again, you'll see that she's equipped with the lyrical wand, and that is to, again, bestow another action point to Virginia to make sure that she's going 5 or 6 times in any given combat, as I think that's the fun part of this whole unit. The rest of her equipment is pretty straightforward. An extra lapis pendant to make sure that we're getting as many restores as possible. In this case, it'll just be 3, but 3 is good enough for now. A silken scarf to increase her evasion so she has a better chance when we get hit with a row attack, as well as a vitality talisman, so if we do get hit with something that's magical, or she does get hit with something, she just has higher chance of living that attack. For her tactics, if there are scouts present, she will go ahead and just buff the front row, as accuracy is the most important thing in those situations, and I want to make sure that Virginia can hit with her regular action points, as well as the Great Knight when we get to his kit. It is still pretty important for other people to land their attacks, even though this is still focusing mainly on Virginia. The extra damage and utility that comes from the Great Knight is still very important to the squad. I do like her to start with Aurora Veil before giving her active point, and that's again to increase the magic resist on both the frontline units as they are more armor focused, so that extra magic resist will always help them tank more magic attacks, and because of the amount of times that Virginia is going to be going, that heal over time doesn't go away after a single turn, so there are times where it gets an immense amount of value just because she's going so many times. And then of course we have active heal in the front row, so she'll pretty much always give an action point to Virginia, and then we wrap it up with restore, primarily focusing on Virginia to make sure that she's getting enough passive points for her kit, which I'll get to eventually, and then if any other unit in the squad does end up getting to 0 passive points before all of her passive points are taken up, she will go ahead and restore those, as other people's passive points are still important to have, and if they run out, I still think it's important for the Were Owl to bestow those passive points to everyone else in the unit. And then starting with the Great Knight in our front line, again, just an insanely good unit. The utility and movement it provides outside of combat is pretty much unmatched, and highly recommend using those whenever possible if you find yourself struggling. Of course, because they're so strong, I totally understand if you want to limit yourself and just not use them. I myself didn't really use them in my expert run, so I am kind of taking advantage of them in my true Zenoiran run, and it's been a lot of fun. Starting with the equipment, my main goal is to make my front line as tanky as possible, so we're using the King's Lance Elhal, not for its attack stats, but mainly for the +5 all stats that it gives everywhere else. Again, I want to emphasize Virginia's power in this team composition, so even though I'm neutering the physical attack of the Great Knight a little bit, it kind of doesn't matter to me as much, as when I watch this unit attack, I mainly want to be watching Virginia attack, and if the Great Knight just softens them up, that's kind of what I'm going for in the first place, because I like Virginia kind of popping off and wiping out a squad by herself. So you'll notice that the Great Knight is using a Squire's Shield, and that's just to help with some of the weaknesses of the unit, and I'll get to that when I explain the Great Knight's tactics. Beyond that, we do have the Lapis Pendant paired with the Thief's Mantle, and that's just for, again, protecting the knight against flying attacks, especially when you get to the later levels, when you can no longer guard against a Griffin Knight's attack. The Thieves' Mantle to help dodge that and be kind of self-sustaining instead of using quick guard, I've found to be kind of successful so far. Moving to the Great Knight's tactics, we mainly want to focus on stunning as many people as possible, again to give room to Virginia to power up. So you'll see that we mainly just use Wild Rush. It's an insane move to begin with, only costing 1 action point and targeting a full column that can stun, and if they're infantry it's going to do a lot of damage anyway, and it's my go-to move for the Great Knight to do. I am also neutering the Great Knight a little bit. I understand that I could be using Assaulting Lance whenever it sees a target kind of low to increase its AP economy, but I'm doing it a little bit on purpose just because, again, I'm just trying to see how well Virginia can act as the main carry and see how many times that she can attack and see how well the unit does. But yeah, if there are no more columns for the Great Knight to attack, it will go ahead and just use Assaulting Lance to target a single target, and if it kills and we get an extra action point, great. If not, softening it up for Virginia is never an issue. The Great Knight has really good defensive stats, so a lot of the time I only want it to evade when it's getting hit by something effective by it, which is just flyers. And paired with Virginia's Iron Veil, that guard rate of 46% actually becomes a 96% chance to guard, so I don't feel the need to have Quick Guard active right now. And we mainly want to focus on the Squire's Shield's quick cover to make sure that we're covering for the Were Owl if we got archers that we need to be afraid of, or if someone in the back line or even Virginia gets really low and the Great Knight is still healthy, we can use quick cover to then cover that weak unit until they get a heal. And then last but not least, we do have the star of the show, Virginia. Looking at her equipment, I'm currently in Bistorius, so I like using the Unfettered Shield to make sure that we're not getting guard sealed or passive sealed. It kind of just makes Virginia still viable in Bistorius, as if she gets guard sealed, it can get pretty nasty. And of course we use the Blue Rose Shield for that extra healing on Royal Guard. The King's Blade is also a given just to buff up the rest of her stats, as she is in the front line, so the more defense, the more HP that we can give her, the better. And then lastly, we have Dancer's Anklet, which is kind of what helps her power up later into the fight to start cleaning up kills and racking up that damage. And it kind of helps solidify her as the main carry of the unit. Moving to her tactics, right now she still only has Vertical Edge and Iron Crusher available to her, so we'll mainly just use Vertical Edge for flying as it is a guaranteed hit, and Iron Crusher for everything else as it does go through guard. That's another reason why I thought of Virginia as a good person to try this out on, as she doesn't need that extra support from a Viking to make sure that she can break through guard, and having a move that does that inherently mainly guarantees that she will actually do damage, and we can actually focus on supporting her only. Her passive tactics are pretty straightforward. Iron Veil puts us at a point where we can fully guard things, and the only thing that we have to worry about are Vikings or if the Great Knight gets guard sealed. Next, we want to make sure that she's using Blade Dance after every attack. So long as she hasn't gotten hit a ton, she'll still have plenty of passive points that after the first couple King calls, when she runs out of those, she'll have enough crit chance from Blade Dance to then proceed to crit after she no longer gets that support from the Sergeant. I still have Maiden's Hammer active, but I might move that tactic condition to only retaliate when it's against a scout, as it is a true strike, but most units will guard against it and it doesn't do a ton of damage, so I might either set it to a health threshold or just when she's attacking a flyer or a scout, so when she does retaliate it is good damage and it doesn't feel like I'm wasting a passive point. Even though it does have a physical potency of 150, you'll see in some of the footage a lot of the time when she is getting those counters, it just doesn't feel like enough damage for it to be useful, and I'd rather she use that passive point on Blade Dance instead. So I'll probably mess around with these conditions, either change it to solely focus flying and scouts, or maybe have it to where she activates Maiden's Hammer when she's 50% or less HP, but you can kind of work with that how you would like to if you are going to steal this composition, or maybe that will help you decide whether or not you want to use Maiden's Hammer in a different way than how you are now. And then finally we have Royal Guard, obviously a really good move for when she's no longer at 100 HP. Since she'll mainly be guarding, I just wanted to make sure that when she uses it, she's using it when she needs to. Even when she does use it when she's at less than 100 HP, there's a little bit of me that wants to change it to 75% HP because she is going to be guarding most of the time, and a lot of those times where she does guard, she's only taking 12 or so damage, and that can just be healed off of Scarlet's quick heal, and we can save Royal Guard, or at least save, again, her passive points for Blade Dance, so we can get those off more often. But for now, I'm playing it safe and just using Royal Guard whenever she's not at 100% HP. So when you see the unit in action, it's actually a pretty safe unit to go with just because of how tanky the front line is and how many options are covered by the front line. Because they're so tanky and we have the Squire's Shield, a lot of the time I don't have to worry about going into archer units about the Were Owl, as the Cav unit will guard against the Were Owl whenever we're getting hit by archers, and we can replenish that if he needs to guard multiple times. And Aurora Veil giving extra magic resist means that we can also go into a lot of magic units without having to worry about taking too much damage either. Now with any unit that doesn't really aim to go first and wipe an entire board, there are going to be weaknesses to it, that's just how it goes. Sometimes you will run into a squad that just has too many follow-up attacks and we just aren't able to get enough heals, or as mentioned before, you go up against a Viking that uses Warhorn and now all of a sudden your 100% guard rate becomes 0, and again all those follow-up attacks just kind of stack up before you're able to recover in time, and that will kind of just do them in. However, I still have a ton of fun with this unit composition, and I really wanted to show off what could be called a Juggernaut comp, as I think it's still one of my most fun ones that I've found in True Zenoiran, and it is a pretty safe one to always deploy, and I also just like Virginia as a unit, so the more I can use her, the better. I will put a disclaimer that I did use some dues of vitality on her. I do believe I maxed out her vitality, so if her vitality was looking a little bit high in the stats, that would be why. It is the only thing that I've invested dues into. I normally don't do that, but I thought because I was going to use her so much, and just for the heck of it, I would try out dues in True Zenoiran and see how it worked out. I hope this sparks some inspiration. I know that there are definitely some other units or unique units that I think can accomplish the same thing that Virginia is, so try and keep these characters in mind when you are building your squads, and I hope that this squad can provide some good inspiration for you for your own team building. If you did make it to this part of the video, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please feel free to give it a like. If you've got some other compositions or comments on my squad, feel free to put it in the comments below. And if you enjoy what I'm doing here, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.